call for God, I see it everywhere.
Everybody's running scared.
And everything is turning upside down. But the words I hear, they keep coming through from deep inside
Me and you, it's telling us love is who I am. You and me were not that far apart. The same heart, we know together from the start. Tell me, can you hear it? Tell me, can you feel it? Put your arms around it and know that we are one. Welcome to A Course of Love. Welcome to A Course of Love. Welcome to A Course of Love.
Now let's come together
And understand that Christ was born inside of every man. He's waiting for us to choose him as ourselves. If you choose him, you know you choose me too. And everyone becomes a part of you. And then you know that love is who I am. You and me were not that far apart. Yeah, we're bleeding the same heart. We've been together from the start. Tell me, can you hear it? Tell me, can you feel it? Put your arms around it and know that we are one. Welcome to A Course of Love.
Yeah, we are one.
Welcome to A Course of Love. Welcome to A Course of Love.
We are one.
Welcome to A Course of Love. Welcome to A Course of Love. Welcome to A Course of Love. This is Earl Purdy, and I'm so glad to have you here with me so we can go deep in the course of love tonight. Woo! This is a course for the heart, not necessarily the mind, but for the heart. And I want to welcome you to be right here. And let's listen to this. You and me were not that far apart. Yeah, we're beating the same heart. We've been together from the start. Oh yeah. Tell me, can you hear it? Tell me, can you feel it? Put your arms around it. Know that we are one. Oh, these are one. We are one.
Yeah, we are one.
Yes, we are one.
Oh, we are one.
Yes, we are one.
I am you.
I am you.
And you are me.
And you are me. It is so good to be here with you for the course of love. I tell you, we must really be threatening the ego. I have never had so much technical difficulties with broadcasting online as I've had the last couple of classes. It's been almost weird how difficult it's been to do the Course of Love in my broadcast Facebook, my broadcast on Facebook. So I'm being asked to look at it. I'm focused on looking at it another way, and I end up using my iPhone because everything. I mean, I had 2 or 3 different uh, iPads to use and everything, and all of it just went crazy. It's just gone haywire. So I love how my life gives me the opportunity to see if I'm going to practice every single thing that I am talking about. And that's exactly what's happening right now. That's exactly what's happening right now. So I'm glad that I have a chance to be with you. I'm glad I have a chance to do this. And if it should happen to go offline, just hang in there for a second. I will be right back. I will return. That is what we're going to do. So take a deep breath with me and ask the ego to take a hike so that we can go ahead and do this particular class tonight. It's on giving and receiving. So I think it's kind of interesting that giving and receiving is the night that the ego is trying so hard to see if it can stop us from doing our thing. Let's see here. Okay. Come on, come on, come on. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. We're gonna plow through the ego problems that is trying to give us right now. I'm trying to get it up on my iPad. So just hang in there with me a second. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for your patience, mighty companions. When the ego tries to do its thing, sometimes that's what it takes. And so I want to thank you, Mark, Dana, Joel, Kim, Gemma, Astrid, Penelope, Claire, Kim, Naeem, and everybody else that's joined me tonight for A Course of Love. So don't forget that we're live, so that means that you can communicate with each other, you can communicate with me, and when I get a chance, I will try to respond. But I know that it's time for, I know it's ultimately not real, but it's important to allow yourself to feel all your feelings. I think one of the ego's greatest tricks is to tell us that it's not okay to express what we feel, even if what we feel is of our ego. That's one of our ego's best tricks, is to make us think it's not okay to express frustration or anger or upset or whatever your ego happens to be going through. And it's always, it's always pretty easy to apply the truth to what somebody else is going through, right? So it's easy for everybody to see it as an illusion for me. But the real challenge is when something comes up for you, if you can maintain that same level of peace and that same level of, oh, it's just an illusion. That's what I try to do. It's like when my stuff come up, the way of mastery has taught me in the Course of Miracles and the Course of Love has taught me, allow all your feelings. That being spiritual doesn't mean that you don't allow yourself to feel whatever you're feeling. Because if you will allow it to flow through you, then you get to the peace that's behind it even faster. But if you try to act like you don't feel what you feel because you're trying to be spiritual, then you block it, and then it stays there, and it occupies your experience a lot more. So I love how life will give us these experiences to see if we can practice that. We're going to be on giving and receiving in A Course of Love. It's chapter 9, and it's on page 228. Page 228. We're on page 228 in A Course of Love, chapter 9, giving and receiving. Giving and receiving. So I'm gonna go as far as I can go. It's a longer chapter than usual, and I'm not gonna rush it. I want to really let this stuff sink in, and I want you to let it sink in for you too. And I'm so glad that all of you are here. I love you. I appreciate you. It's you are a blessing in my life. You're a dream in my life. And we're talking about in chapter 9, paragraph 1. It starts out with the art of thought is not possible without a return to the virgin, which is the unaltered self. The practice of the art of thought is what will complete the return and begun through the coursework in a course of love. So we're going to practice the art of thinking. So if we practice the art of thinking, it says this will bring about the union of the male and the female, the union of the conception and action, the union of inspiration and manifestation, which means this is what we've been speaking of whenever we speak of miracle mindedness or miracle readiness. So what is miracle readiness? Miracle readiness is wholeheartedness. And what did the Course of Love tell us that wholeheartedness was? A Course of Love told us that wholeheartedness is a uniting of your thought and your heart, a uniting of your will and your feelings. So it says whether you be male or female doesn't matter, because would you like to know why it doesn't matter whether you are male or female? Well, the reason why it doesn't matter whether you're male or female is because in your truest nature, you are a union of each. In our true nature, we are a union of male and female. So the end of the separation that brought about the resurrection brought about the union, and the separation of male and female continues to exist only in form. So we're only male and female in form. We're only male or female in the body. But the truth is, we are both now male and female. At this stage of our spiritual development, it's time for us to become aware that our true nature is a combination of male and female. Even though it may look like I have a male body and it may look like you have a female body, the truth is we are a combination of male and female. And it says, however, we are talking now in a certain sense of an elevation of form. While this is actually an elevation beyond form, it must begin in reality where you think you are. So our transformation has to begin in the reality that we think we are. In other words, the transformation has to begin with form, with you seeing yourself as a form. That's where it starts. You cannot await some changed state, but must create the changed state you await. So rather than waiting for everything to change us, we must create the changed state that we are waiting for. We are initiating, we are opening ourselves up. We are allowing ourselves to create the changed state that we want to. So it says you are used to creating in outward ways. So what does that mean? It means that we're used to doing everything on the outer. One of the few exceptions to this outer creation, it says, is the act of giving birth. But birth, like all outward manifestations, birth just reflects an inner change. So whenever you go through an inner change, does that mean that you've just gone through a rebirth? Yes. I'm going through a rebirth right now. And as a result of going through that rebirth right now, my ego is defending in every way possible to get me to focus my attention on the body, to try to get me to focus my attention on things to get upset about, because that's what the ego does whenever you are threatening your ego's control over your experience. But you've already gone beyond your ego, and you're just seeing the after image of your ego. You're seeing the ego that you used to have that's fading away. So the growth of a new being within the womb of another, that's a visible manifestation of gestation, which is the prelude to resurrection. What was once part of the mother and the father, what would have died without the joining that occurred within the mother and the father, that becomes the baby, which is a new life. So what is it that we are being asked to do? What is it that we're being asked to do right now? You are asked to carry a new life, not in the womb, but it's time for you to carry a new life in your united mind and your united heart. So you've been asked to carry a new life now, but this new life is not a physical life. This new life has to do with you uniting your mind with your heart. Your thoughts and your heart should now be joined in a new life. So What is it that we should consider? What is it that we should consider? What is it that we should be considering? It says, well, let us consider why birth has been the purview of women and males have been incapable of giving birth. This is because in your version of creation, it says in our version of creation, there needed to be a giver and receiver. You knew that giving and receiver makes one in truth. This is your recreation of this universal truth. You remember that something does not come from nothing and that nothing is all that exists without relationship. So nothing exists unless there's a relationship. And the fact that you and I are joining in relationship means that we are definitely in the process of creating. And the course of love says, and you have not remembered that the first union is the union of the mind and the heart. So what is the first union? The first union is the union with the self. This union with the self, which is what you and I are attempting to do, that union with the self is resurrection. That union of the self is rebirth. So your first union is your union with yourself. Take a breath. My first union is my union with myself. The first union that I want is the union with myself. I ask for a conscious awareness of the union with myself. I'm ready to experience a union with my true self. It's time for a union with my true self. It's time for a union with your true self. This union with your true self, that's what resurrection is. That's what the rebirth is. Now, your true self is not your ego. Your true self is not your self-concept. Your true self is not your self-image. Your true self is not your body. Your true self is not your gender. Your true self is beyond anything that you can perceive with the physical eyes. So the first union is a union with your true self. And that union with your true self, that's what you could call resurrection. That's what you could call rebirth. So what then of the necessary act of giving and receiving? In paragraph 8, chapter 9, in the course of love, it says, but what then of the necessary act of giving and receiving? Is this necessary act of giving and receiving, is this the birth of the self? Who is the giver? Who is the receiver? So in order for yourself to be born, in order for yourself to be birthed, giving and receiving must be one in truth. Let me say it another way. There's a lesson in the Course in Miracles, and that lesson in the Course in Miracles says, all that I give is given to myself. All that I give is given to myself. Giving and receiving is the same. All that I give is given to myself. You are myself. I am yourself. There is just one self. So everything you give is ultimately given to yourself. Giving and receiving are one in truth. Yet it seems there must be somebody who gives and somebody who receives. You have long waited to receive what you have thought could come only from some other. So he's saying that there's a part of us that keeps waiting for someone else to give us what we want. That there's always the belief that what we want has to come from outside of ourselves. And it says your churches are but evidence of this, because even in religion, we look for an intercessor. We look for the priest or the minister to facilitate for us the giving and receiving from God. But the truth is, it's only through the Christ inside of you. It's only through the Christ, your real self, the one self, your true self within you that does this giving and receiving. And that's how it becomes one in truth. So Jesus says, because Jesus is actually the one that is speaking through Mari, who's channeling A Course of Love, he says, as I awaited my death, I was given the gift of knowing what would come to be through my resurrection. This I tried to pass on in the simplest terms. What? What would come to be through the resurrection of Jesus. Jesus says, I tried to make it known that while I would die, and resurrect into a new form, you would also. When I read the Bible, that was one of the things that really impacted me, was that I noticed in the New Testament that Jesus was constantly telling everyone everything that was going to happen to him. He was very aware that he was going to go through the crucifixion. He was very aware that he was here to demonstrate the resurrection, that he was born to show us that what we really are really does not die. Who and what we really are is beyond the body. But because of guilt, the emphasis has been put on the crucifixion, which is often used to make us feel guilty and to make people feel guilty. Oh, the Son of God died because of us. God's Son died because of my sins. That's guilt up the yin yang. And that is not the message that Jesus came to teach. Jesus came to teach that you do not die, you resurrect, and you can also take on a new form. It says that this new form would exist, but it would exist within you, which means that you would become the body of Christ, the body of love. We would become the body of the one self, the body of the one creation. And then giving and receiving would be complete. One of the things that I try to really focus in on is that A Course of Love is a channeled book, which means that Mari, who channeled it, was being used as a conduit for something, some consciousness, some awareness, the spirit, Jesus, if you would, something outside of our perception, to communicate through her to us. And I was thinking that if I even looked at that for a minute, the fact that this book is claiming to come from something outside of our perception, that in itself would be mind-boggling, because just the nature of how this material came should indicate to us that there's more to life than what we've been taught, that there's an invisible side of things that's even more real, and that we have invisible help, and that we have invisible helpers. One of the things that we hear all the time is that we're trapped inside the bubble of our perception, that our physical senses just witness that which we believe and that which we focus in on. So we're ultimately filtering out everything beyond the physical senses. And so we're being communicated through this channel material to let us know that we've been hoodwinked, we've been fooled, that we've forgotten who and what we truly are. You are the body of Christ. You are the body of love. You are the body of truth. So what will it mean to bring about the union of the male and female? What will it mean to bring about the union of conception and of inspiration and of manifestation? When we unite, it will be a time of miracles. Like sometimes our intellect can get caught up on, what does this mean? Let me analyze what's being said. How does that conflict with what I believe? But the real miracle, the real power, the real joining is coming from the fact that we're even gathered here together, joining on the idea of remembering who we are beyond our physical body. That's the beauty of what we're doing, is that there are those of us who know and who can feel that we're beyond what we're being taught we are. There are some of you out there that are just like me. From the time you were a child, you knew that there was more to this world and more to life and more to the truth than what we were being told. So you never quite fit in. It never seemed really real to you. That there's always been something about this experience that felt a little off, because you knew that your soul remembered more about what life is about than what we are being taught. And so, in the broadest of terms, this rebirth, it has already happened. Now, as the ego has become threatened, as your old concept of yourself, your old personality, your false self, the one that's been defined by the world, as the ego has become threatened. And how does your ego become threatened? Well, your ego becomes threatened because you've allowed the coming of guidance. You finally start listening to the voice of God and the voice of truth and the voice of your spirit within yourself. And in doing that, you have actually threatened your ego. So males and females both have begun to work with the parts of themselves over which the ego has the least control. And that's what we're doing. We're working with the part of ourselves that our ego does not control. Being here, talking the truth, sharing love, wanting to focus on God, wanting to get in touch with our spiritual identity. That's us working with the part of ourselves that our old ideas about ourselves does not have any control over. Thank God. When we come together, we're focusing on the part of ourselves that our ego does not control. We are now in this moment using the part of ourselves that our ego doesn't have any control over. That's why we're joining. That's why we're having this experience. Now, if you're a male or if you are identified with the male, it says this is most often meant a turning away from the intellectual realm. For males, this has most often meant a turning away from the intellectual realm, which has been ruled by the ego. So what does that mean? It means that the male energy, the masculine, is usually focused more on the intellect. And so in order to have the balance, then the masculine starts to focus in more on the feelings and the intuition and the feminine part of themselves. So one of the things that happened as I began my spiritual journey was I started to get more in touch with my feelings, which was something as a man and as a male, I was taught that it was almost a weakness for me to tune in on the feminine in myself, in the feelings in myself, in the intuition in myself. For females who are ready for the balance and the transformation, this has most often meant a turning away from the feeling realm where their egos held most sway toward the intellectual. So if for the male, the intellect is where the ego, for the masculine, the intellectual aspect was where the ego predominantly lived. And for the feminine, it was the feeling nature where the ego predominantly lived. And so as part of the awakening, the feminine starts to focus more on the intellect and the masculine starts to focus more on the feeling. For females, this most often meant, it says, a turning away from the feeling realm where their egos held most sway toward the intellectual. Now, this instinctual turning toward the opposite has been made to serve you through the intercession of the Holy Spirit. So through the intercession of the Holy Spirit, we experience this turning toward the opposite. But now we're doing something different. In turning within rather than without to find what you need to free you from the ego's realm, you have turned to wholeness. And turning to wholeness means turning within. In the same way that embracing both the male and female attributes within you, see, I'm embracing the male and the female attributes within myself. I noticed that as I started to embrace the feminine in myself, I noticed that my relationship with women became much more loving, much more peaceful, much more harmonious, because the women around me were merely projections and extensions and reflections of my own feminine self. So as I embraced the feminine within myself, it was easier for me to appreciate, honor, and embrace the feminine outside myself. And I found that among the women that I knew that were on a spiritual path, the more they embraced the masculine within themselves, then they were able to relate better to the masculine outside themselves. So we see ourselves as opposite. If we see ourselves as different, then we're going to oppose and conflict with each other. So embracing both the male and female within you will cause a merging of both and a wholeness to be achieved. So too does a wholeness then come about with conception and action brings about a wholeness. Inspiration and manifestation brings about a wholeness. So I'm inspired and I join that with manifestation. I want to manifest what I am inspired about. So some of you may have a little bit of a challenge with what I'm saying. It says, because lest you fight these ideas that I'm giving you as stereotypical, I will give you just a few more brief examples. So let's keep our minds open, because remember, the guidelines to A Course of Love is that we need not believe it, we need not accept it, we need not welcome it. Some of it's going to be hard to believe, some of it's going to be quite startling, but if we use it, then we'll see that the ideas are true. So thank you for sharing, Tony. Thank you for sharing, CJ, Dana, Karen. I love having you online, and I love that you're communicating with each other, and also share the video. So, so it says in paragraph 13, chapter 9, in A Course of Love, in the first treatise, that's where we are. It says, lest you fight these ideas as stereotypical, I will give you just a few brief examples. These I ask you to cull from your own recent experience. What has caused the ego to become more apparent to you as you learn this course? What has caused your ego to become more obvious to you? What's caused your ego to become more obvious to you? Has it not seemed like your ego kind of lies dormant for periods of time? All of a sudden, it looks like you got your ego kind of chilled out and cooled out, and then your ego looks like it's suddenly called back to life through some event or situation. Doesn't it look like you're advancing spiritually? You're having more peace, you're having more harmony, you're seeming to really get it, and then some situation comes up unexpectedly, and before you know it, you're right back into your ego. You're right back into your fear. You're right back into attack. Bunny, it's so good to see you online. Bunny and I go way, way back. So what was the event? What was the situation that happened when you lost your peace? And all of a sudden you were right back into your ego again. Well, A Course of Love says basically it's for one reason. Something threatened your self-image. Something you were doing, something you've been studying, like A Course of Love, for instance, A Course in Miracles, other truth books. The threat to your ego is a threat to your self-image. And your self-image is your image of yourself. It's the idea of yourself that you have made up. It's the idea of yourself that you've made up. The idea of yourself that you've made up, that's the idea that gets threatened when you study spiritual truth. Your whole sense of identity, that me I have made up, my ego, gets threatened. And did this threat occur at what you would call the feeling level, or did your threat occur at the intellectual level? Were your feelings hurt, and that was what stirred you up? Or was it your pride, and that's what stirred you up? Your feelings called into question. Your feelings, your feeling. So that's interesting. There's a new thing that it looks like Facebook is doing, where you can bring other people on camera also. And so it's been asking me to add people on camera, and I thought it was asking me to add people so that they could watch the Facebook Live presentation. But what it was really doing was allowing me to bring them on camera and they could also be seen while I'm talking. So this is a new feature, and that's okay. That just means that we will be able to have group meetings sometimes where people will be able to actually see each other. But so anyway, well, something very new, Facebook, that y'all really didn't talk about too much. So anyway, uh, it's just so funny. It's like it's so many weird things that are happening this evening because you know what? Obviously, my ego feels threatened. Something about this is threatening me. So is it threatening me on a feeling level? Is it threatening me on an intellectual level? It's saying your feelings called into question. Are my feelings being called into question? Is it my ideas that are being called into question? And what guise did the ego take as the ego rallied to your aid? Is your ego requiring right now that you retreat in that situation that you've gotten upset about? Or is your ego um, requiring that you continue to advance? Did your ego or the situation or the circumstance that came up, did it stir your emotions? Or did the situation that came up today that upset you, or did it did it attempt to quiet your emotions? Did your ego try to stir your emotions up, or did your ego attempt to quiet them? In paragraph 14, chapter 9, it says, these may be difficult questions to answer. Why? As your initial reaction and your response will likely have taken on different forms. You may, for instance, have reacted by being hurt. You may reacted by getting angry. Your response may then have been either an emotional response to the situation that upset you, or you may have an intellectual response. The point that I'm making here is that the one that is most comfortable and that is likely your first reaction is cognizant with your old pattern, which is the pattern of the ego. I've often said in my classes that the way that you handle upset is the best way to tell what level of consciousness you're on. Because when your ego hits, that's when you go to your default setting. That's where you act out of the pattern that's most true for you. So if you want to understand your ego, if you want to understand the patterns of your ego, it's the way you react when you're most upset. How do you handle upset? Do you remember the truth that we're studying? That you are giving it all the meaning that it has for you. That you are responsible for how you see the situation. Do you remember that you are the one that's choosing the feelings that you're experiencing? Do you always remember that you are the one that is deciding on the goal and the purpose in any situation that you're in? When you're upset, do you remember that everything that seems to happen to you is something you have called to yourself at some level, something that's helping your soul grow at some level? Just like earlier when I was making myself, notice that I'm saying when I was making myself feel frustrated. And me remembering that it was okay for me to feel my feelings. It was okay for me to allow myself to just be. When I remembered that I didn't have to condemn myself for making myself feel frustrated. That was me going to my default setting, which was to remember that I was innocent. It was okay for me to feel what I felt, and I didn't have to act like it was something to feel ashamed about, or that somehow or another I wasn't being as spiritual as I should be because I was making myself feel frustrated about how the technical things were messing up the broadcast at the very beginning. In other words, your first reaction lets you get in touch with the pattern of your ego. So, what breaks the ego's hold? Do you want to know what will break your ego's hold over you? Yes. I want to remember what will break the hold of fear and anger and frustration over me, that's the ego. What breaks the ego's hold will be the second reaction. Your first reaction to something, that's your ego. How you react next, that's what's going to break the hold of the ego. The turning away from the old. Okay, I was making myself feel upset. So what's my second reaction? My second reaction is to pause for inspiration, is to take a breath and then ask my higher self, ask the Holy Spirit, ask God, what do you want me to do? Where do you want me to go? What do you want me to say? Who do you want me to say it to? Pause for a minute, take a breath, and ask for another way to look at it. That's what will break the pattern of your ego. It's taking a moment to pause, take a breath, ask for another way to look at it. Just that instant that you give yourself, where you stop attacking yourself, because that's what your anger and upset is doing, by the way. It's an attack upon yourself. Take a breath, recognize that that's your call for God, that's your call for love, that you're still innocent, that you're still loved. It's just an ego thought. It's just a thought that's there to make you forget the truth. It's a distraction. Take a moment to ask for another way to look at it. So one first reaction might be to puff yourself up with pride, to try to be right and boast of your position, that you might try to think your way through or argue or manipulate or try to chastise somebody else so that you will feel better in the relationship to the other in the situation or event. Which brings us back to that incredible question. Do you want to be right or do you want to be happy? Another first reaction when an upsetting situation presents itself is that you might try to wallow in self-pity. You might try to make yourself feel guilty. You might try to make somebody else feel guilty. Sometimes when you look at yourself as a loving spiritual being, the thing that you can do is you can beat yourself up too much with guilt. People that see themselves as spiritual, sometimes they don't attack others, but what they do is they attack the hell out of themselves by feeling guilty. Somehow or another, if I feel really, really guilty, if I feel really, really bad, that's going to make me a good person. The more guilt I feel, the better the person is that I am. That's another big illusion. That's another ego trick. Or you might, sometimes your ego might try to make you feel a sense of diminished self-esteem. Or your ego might try to make you feel like you're unworthy. So the first thing I said, trying to make yourself right, arguing, manipulating, that will feel like an intellectual position. The second way of reacting, which is self-pity or making yourself feel guilty or making someone else feel guilty, that is an ego reaction of feeling. And he says, turning away from the intellectual position to one of feeling will most readily and quickly solve the first. In other words, the second, reacting with feeling, would be most readily and quickly overcome by a turn toward reason or the intellect. The perceived attack will have entered at the place where you have placed your highest value and where you're the most vulnerable. You always feel the most vulnerable around the thing that you value the most and the thing that you give the most meaning to, the thing that you made the most special. That's where the perceived attack on yourself will seem to be the strongest. So in the past, your response would have been to protect and use that which you have most valued. Now, through what we're studying, we are going to change our response. So if you feel confused, stop trying to figure out what I am saying from the book. Breathe. Your understanding is not a powerful contribution to the truth. Your understanding does not make the truth true. So focus on what you do understand, focus on what does reach you, and let go of the rest. This is about the heart. It is not about the analytical mind. You are trying to change your response now. That's what the focus should be on. You will not see so much to value in what has called your ego into action. And what you're going to do is learn to turn away from what brought your ego into action. The core thing that brought your ego into action is the idea of, if this thing outside of myself were different, I would be okay and happy. If this situation or circumstance outside of myself were different, I would be happy. If I was in another place, I would be happy. If I was in another circumstance, I would be happy. What causes the ego reaction is for you to think that there's something about your happiness that is being caused by something outside of yourself. So what you want to do is take a breath, pause, tell yourself you're ready to change your response. It says what was, quote unquote, is being thrown out. And the first step in this is embracing what you have never embraced before. So you are pulling forth sides of yourselves that were previously undervalued, rather than looking for somebody else to provide what's missing. So as you change your response, you're no longer looking for somebody else to provide for you anything that's missing in your life. What you're going to do is pull all the sides and aspects and dimensions of yourself that you have not really valued. You are going to bring those sides of yourself to the front, to the foreground. So this is important. This is universal in its impact. I know it can seem like it's without balance. I know it can seem like everything we're talking about is about balance. I'm not talking about bringing everything into balance. The Course of Love is talking about wholeness. Yes, CJ, I love our global tribe too. And I can feel and I see your beautiful comments. And I wish I could hug all of you, kiss all of you. I can feel our joined energy. And I am thankful that you are here. And I am thankful that you value these times together enough to tune in live. Because I know, and it's beautiful when you tune in anytime that you want to. But to take the time in your schedule to make sure that you're here at the time of the live broadcast, I just want you to know how much I like that, how much I value you for doing that, and I value you anytime you watch the broadcast. Just today, I went over the threshold of 1 million views of my videos, and it's mind-boggling to me that that has occurred. And I pray every day that what comes through me is helpful. I'm just here to be truly helpful. And that is my goal. Service means more to me than anything now, because I know that money in and of itself will not give fulfillment and happiness. I know that power in and of itself as an ego, at an ego level, will not give me fulfillment and happiness. I know that being special and famous in and of itself will not give me happiness and fulfillment. And I know physical pleasure in and of itself will not fulfill me. And so I'm so glad that I've awakened enough to know that there's nothing more important on this earth than to be a conduit for God, to have the Creator live its life through me, and to have me being used for love and to love you. So I value you, mighty companions. I treasure you beyond what you could possibly imagine. And I want to thank you for watching my videos. Thank you for checking in to Facebook Live. Thank you for giving and receiving with me. So don't look for anybody else, quote unquote, to provide what you lack, because there's nothing missing in you. You want to pull together all the different aspects of yourself, because you are a multidimensional, unlimited being. You are so far beyond just a physical body that you're indescribable. There are no words. There are no words to describe what you are. So when the different attributes are merged, when all of your qualities are merged, male and female will be no more. Wholeness is what's going to rule. Now, Chris, I'm wanting to be helpful in speeding up the process for us all. That is why you're here. Your being here is speeding up the process for us all. This is a very, 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 very powerful section. So take a breath. I'm so glad that you were here with me for this session this evening. I want to thank you in advance for making a financial expression of appreciation if you feel so moved. I dedicated myself to being a full-time teacher, and so thank you for sharing. And if those of you who would like to, because you feel moved to, just go to my website, earlpurdy.com, earlpurdy.com. I'm also available for one-on-one sessions called Clarity Sessions. I've been doing this for 40 years, and I can show you how to apply this information to remove any blocks in your experience. And I also use my knowledge of astrology and numerology, which the study of which got me on my spiritual path in the first place. Incredible way for spirit to communicate with us when seen correctly. Go to my website, earlpurdy.com. It explains the services that I offer. And I'm having the Holy Spirit, the higher self, is giving me some incredible workshops that I'm going to be presenting online and in person. So go to my website and sign up for my contact list. And that music was my brother John Christmas. So just go to johnchristmas.com. You can download it for free. So on 1:00 p.m. Mountain Times on Sundays, I do A Course in Miracles on Facebook Live. On Tuesdays at 7:00 Mountain Time p.m., I do The Way of Mastery. And of course on Thursday night, we do A Course of Love. It is very, very powerful. So tonight, what did we do? Well, tonight we were told that giving and receiving are the same. We were told that as we begin to wake up more and more, we will recognize that we are, first we go to the realization that we are both male and female, no matter what our physical body looks like. You are now reaching a level of consciousness where there is a joining of your male and female self. If you've been primarily identified with the masculine or the male self, then in order to bring about the transformation beyond the ego, then embrace more of the feminine in yourself. If you have been primarily identified with the feminine or the female self, which is of the feeling nature, then you tune in more to your intellect in order to bring that part of yourself in balance. Recognize that everything that you're giving is given to yourself. There's just one self. It looks like there are many of us. It looks like we're different, but we're not. We are just God. You are just God. I am just God. We are all just the divine. And we're learning that giving and receiving is the same. That all that you give is given to yourself. All that you give is given to yourself. All that you give is given to yourself. The first step is embracing what you haven't ordinarily embraced. You no longer look to anybody else to provide what you think is lacking. As you bring all of your powerful attributes together, guess what?
You are sinless, you are sinless, you are a child of God. You are sinless, you are sinless, loves you and you are. Your invulnerability was your father's guarantee. You would forever be completely free. You are guiltless, you are guiltless, you are a child of God. You are guiltless, you are guiltless, love you as you are. Your invulnerability was your father's guarantee that you would forever be completely free. But you keep on singing, you keep on singing, yes, you keep on singing the blues.
Stop singing the blues. Stop singing the blues.
When you gonna stop singing? When you gonna stop singing? It's time for you to learn you have nothing to lose.
Remember, when you first have a reaction, your ego is acting up right now because you may have threatened your ego. You are getting beyond the self-images that you were taught. You are beginning to realize that you are more than a human being. And your ego feels threatened. That part of your old self, your old ego self feels threatened because you are daring to remember your infinite, powerful nature. And so it will get stirred up sometime. And when your ego gets stirred up, take a deep breath and pause. Pause for inspiration. When you feel yourself getting upset, take a deep breath. Ask your higher self, what do you want me to do? Ask God, where do you want me to go? Ask God, what do you want me to say? And who do you want me to say it to? Remind yourself that your ego is stirred up right now because it is trying to distract you, because you are making wonderful, wonderful progress. So know that your ego will try to distract you when you actually are claiming your true identity, remembering who you are spiritually. Your ego will try to distract you and tell yourself, this is a defense against the truth. This situation that has me upset, it's a defense against the truth. This is a trick to try to make me forget that I am not this upset. This is a trick to try to make me go spiritually asleep. You know what? This anger is my call for love. This depression is my call for help. This depression, this anger, this lack, this sickness is just my call for help. I'm going to recognize that I have a male and female nature, and what I am is beyond my male and female nature. Ultimately, though, I am spirit. I am spirit. I am spirit. I am spirit. You are spirit. You are spirit. We are spirit. We are spirit. Giving and receiving are the same. Giving and receiving are the same. All that I give is given to myself. All that you give is given to yourself. All that you give is given to yourself. Thank you for another beautiful, loving, healing, exquisite time together. Please share this video. I love you. I appreciate you. You're a blessing in my life. And I'll see you next time.